Netflix brought out some results. They were absolutely staggering results. The market was expecting an increase in the first quarter of about 9.5 million new subscribers. Instead, they added something like 15.8 million paid subscribers, which was an incredible amount. Way above what everyone was expecting. And that's understandable, because I think in the kind of atmosphere we are, or the climate, you can understand that people are looking for entertainment. As Netflix said, they want to make lockdown bearable. But we saw similar results from Intel as well. Intel reported a couple of days ago also some very strong results where they've seen an increase in revenue for their data centers, for their PCs, and also Internet of Things. As more and more people work from home, and more people work from home and use PCs as well. So you're seeing the demand for data, the demand for storage and cloud is that increasing quite significantly as well. So it just shows you how technology has come to the fore. But this is something that was happening before this, before we started a lockdown. Just on lockdown, we didn't order this. This lockdown, or the close of the global economy, has upon us. It's damaging our business, and it's also keeping us apart from friends and family. And Jay Powell, when he released a very strong package 2 weeks ago, just over 2.3 billion package, he sympathized with people, and he said, we're giving this package in order to get people over this very difficult period. Those people who are standing have lost their jobs. Those businesses that are under pressure didn't order this. This is not their fault. So who's to blame? If it's not their fault, who's to blame? And the one thing I do want to say, regardless, even though they're not to blame, when we come out of this, there is going to be damage. There are going to be long-lasting consequences in that. Many companies are going to be laden with a lot of debt that they have to pay. Even if they're not paying high interest rates on it, they're still going to have debt on their balance sheets and so on. People who lose jobs might not get their jobs back. As people reassess the businesses, maybe they won't be keen to re-employ people as hectically as they have in the past. So I think regardless of how we approach this, there are going to be consequences of this. Times are not easy. I've lived through many crises before, and we've come out of all of them. But I think what defines this one before is this actual lockdown. In 9/11 it was also a shock incident, but within a few weeks on that, we had already started our living. It was a one-off affair. So many people were killed. As tragic as it was ongoing. In 1987, we could predict what was going to happen. The markets were exuberant. In 2008 and 2009, the markets were excessive. People were speculating. Even in 2000, at the internet boom. So many of the previous crises that we've had have been financial crises, which we've been able to predict and position ourselves for. But this one has been different in the sense that we've never had to deal with a global economy closing down. But there's another element as well, which I have to bring up, which has also caused uncertainty and discomfort, and that's in the oil market. And that was triggered by the Russians and the Saudis having a spat between themselves, having a battle over supply, wanting to dominate the oil price for whatever the political reasons behind it, I'm not sure. But it sent oil into a downward spiral. And if you watch markets, it was that incident that actually sent markets a lot lower than we'd seen. Why they did it, I have absolutely no idea. But we still haven't recovered from that oil crisis. And even though from today, or from this week, we will start cutting back in oil, or production will be cut, it's still we're still not going to get over the shock. Last week, as I said, last Monday, oil actually went into deficit. People were paying to get rid of oil. There's such a glut. But I think that we can't just ignore what's happened in the oil market and the impact that it's having on the global economy, even with this agreement to cut back in supply. So how do we define where we are in markets? It's not easy. I don't know. I can't classify it. I've never been a person who likes to package things or put things into perspective. I'm not a value investor. I'm not a growth investor. I don't believe in bear markets. I don't believe in saying this is a recovery within the bear market, and so on. I think human behavior is so unpredictable, so we don't really know what the next move is. So we have to watch markets. We literally have to get through this crisis day by day, recalibrating where we are on literally a minute-to-minute basis. How do we get out of it? The only way that we will get out of it is as we start to forecast or understand the path of the virus, what the effect's going to be on businesses, and how quick global economies are going to recover. So that's what we're watching on a day-to-day basis. As I'm talking to you now, US markets are very strong again. The S&P is up another 1%, so we're notching up further towards where we were in February. And I think that's how it's going to go. But we remain very uncertain, and no one wants to forecast where the next move is going to be. Just to get things into perspective as well on markets, just from the top to the bottom. Let me just go further. I think just to get things into perspective as well, I lost my train of thought there. We're going to get over this. This is not going to be with us forever. I don't think we're going to enter into a world where we walk around with masks, where we eat alone in restaurants, sitting in a booth, or we holiday in some remote place. We go to the game reserve or somewhere like that to get away from people. It's just not part of our character to actually isolate ourselves from society. If you just ask kids, kids who generally hate school are missing school. They're missing their friends. They're missing playing at break. They're missing being naughty in class. They're missing all of that. And of course, their misery is reflected on parents. So I think once this is all over, we're going to eat out. We're going to travel. We're going to continue to travel, and we're going to continue to meet our friends and be sociable. It's just that we're going to be a lot more aware of health and issues associated with people in tight spaces. Another thing, when we come out of this, we're going to be a lot more technically competent. We're going to understand technology a lot, and also we're going to be a lot more aware of hygiene and cleanliness. And I think the one thing that always amazes me about these crises and about people is that at the moment we're living modestly. We're showing a lot of goodwill. We're showing charity. But I think as soon as things return to normal, believe me, we're going to go back to our old selves as well and just unlearn all of these issues. That's just human nature. But I think one thing for sure is that when we come out of this crisis, people are going to judge companies. They're going to judge companies as how they behave, how they treated their customers, how they treated their suppliers, how they treated their shareholders, and that. Did they share or did they hoard? And I think, again, that is a trend that was on its way, that was already happening in the world, but we're going to see more of it. Already we've seen a lot of businesses here, for the way that they behave, by not paying rent, by perhaps gouging. I think a lot of these are unwarranted and perhaps unsubstantiated, but you can understand how people are responding to this and how sensitive they are to how you as a person or you as a business behave. So believe me, that's going to be one big change that we've seen. But as I mentioned, this was already on its way. Just to recap and look at markets, we've had a big recovery. We're down from the peak, and I'm going to the US markets first. We're down maybe 15, 16% at the worst. We're up significantly. At one time, we were down about 34%. We've recovered half of that and seem to be edging higher and higher, making up lost ground. But it's going to take some time before we recover all that ground. On the JSE, it's been a similar situation as well, that we have come from the very low base that we saw midway through March and that, and we've recovered quite a lot. And I think it will probably continue, but much at a slower pace. My own take of it is that those people who want out are already out. They've gone out. The hedge funds, I think, are short. In other words, they've positioned themselves for further falls, which is a good sign because it means there's an underpin. And likewise, I think a lot of fund managers are underweight equities, long of cash. In other words, I think the market is very nervous of the market, but those who want out are out. So I think that's a good sign that generally underpins or gives a bottom. But I think what's fascinating is to look and see who the winners have been, because there have been a lot of winners in this market and there have been losers as well. But if you look at the winners, and I'm going to go to the US market to give you those winners, obviously the one is Zoom, what we're using at the moment. Zoom is up, I don't know, since the beginning of the year, maybe 150%. I haven't seen the latest thing. It's now going to be included in the NASDAQ 100, which is included in that index. It's come from absolutely nowhere, so we can understand. Tesla, for reasons I don't understand, about 75%. Then companies like Netflix, Amazon, all up in the region of a 30% since the beginning of the year. So if you'd held those shares, you would have been done well. Gilead, Advanced Micro Devices, NVIDIA, Abbott Robotics, Activision, Blizzard, Microsoft, all companies associated with either finding a vaccine or a solution for COVID-19 or alternatively in the technology space. So companies like that have actually done very well, and some of them are within reaching distance or touching distance of their all-time highs. We've seen Kroger and Walmart, which are general stores, also doing very well, of course, because of demand and also because of their e-commerce platforms. But it's not only in the US that companies have done well. If you look at Europe, if you look at Asia, you look at the UK, we've seen pharmaceutical companies doing pretty well. Novo Nordisk, AstraZeneca, Roche, Reckitt and Benckiser, we now are the suppliers or the makers of Lysol and, of course, of Dettol. Their shares have also done incredibly well. If we go to the JSE, Process up about 30%. Naspers up 30%. We know because of their exposure to technology and also because of their exposure to Tencent, which is doing pretty well as China opens up. We've also seen gold shares do pretty well on the JSE. All of them making big gains. That's on the upside. What about the downside? On the downside in the JSE, we've seen property come under enormous pressure, which is largely a reflection of the economy. It hasn't much to do with COVID. I don't think it's got much to do. This was already going to happen. We're in a local economy which is already in recession before the virus hit us, and just going to be worse as a result of that. But we're seeing their not property values falling, but rentals coming down quite significantly as companies feel the pressure, and also, of course, vacancies vacancies increasing. Just on the downside in the global economy, naturally, it's been oil. With oil now at these multi-year lows, all oil service companies and oil companies are under a lot of pressure. We've also seen the airlines taking a hammering as they battle to survive, and banks as well. And of course, you can understand banks who are going to bear the brunt of the crisis. They expect to see an increase in impairments and, of course, bad debts as well. And with interest rates as low as they are, it's very, very difficult for them to make margins. There's no merger activity, and also generally, loans as well. In this kind of genuine loans are also a bit short. So we see three distinct markets taking place at the moment. It's not only one market, there are three markets that we are watching for guidance. The first is the one that we're very interested in, the one that I'm mentioning to you, which is the health and technology market, where individual shares are doing pretty well and will continue to do well. We'll talk about that in a few seconds as well. The second market, which is as important as the first market is the oil market. As we speak at the moment now, oil continues to fall. Brent, which is what we generally use as a measure for our oil price, is below $20 a barrel, and I think WTI, which is the American version, as long as I've seen, is about $13 or $14 a barrel, and that's very, very low prices there. But what you don't understand is that oil makes up about 8% of the US economy, so it's a very big contributor to the global economy. And you can understand why Trump is putting pressure on other nations to cut back on production. He wants the oil price up. And also from an election point of view, Texas, Pennsylvania, Ohio, which are big fracking areas and that are swing kind of states, which he needs. And the last thing he wants to do is to have the oil price and find economic pressure there. So it's very important for him to put pressure and to try and see the oil price up. So understand there's a political bias to this as well. The third one that we're watching, the third market that we're watching, and there perhaps other markets, is China. China is probably back to 90% of its production. Factories are opening, other businesses are opening, and people are getting in the streets again, traffic's improving there and so on. But what we're watching and why we're watching is to see the behavior of consumers. Do they start traveling again? Do they go to restaurants? Is there social interaction and so on? So it's a very important fact. Are they spending? Is there revenge spending? Revenge spending means that after lockdown, after punishing yourself, you go and buy something big. We've seen some good numbers coming out of LVMH, which is on the luxury side, spending picking up there as a result of that. But I think it's going to be a very important factor, because this is going to be the first market or the first area out of the crisis and we're going to be watching that pretty carefully. Look, they're 90%, which is better than 50%, but we'll keep on, we'll keep on watching. Just looking at where we are, it's been about 100 years since the Spanish flu. We haven't had an incident like that. We've had world wars, etc., but we haven't had any kind of incident. And what's disturbed me more than anything else out of this whole incident is just how disjointed governments are, how uncoordinated governments have been over this whole crisis. Generally, we would see the US taking the lead in a crisis. In 2008 and 2009, during the subprime crisis, it was America who got the banks together, who got all the nations together to talk about a common approach to get the global economy going. In AIDS, when we had the AIDS epidemic, it was America who got countries together and try and find a global solution to AIDS. But in this crisis, America has been, if anything, has been absent. Trump has shown very little enthusiasm to get nations together and to try and find a global solution. France did try to a certain extent. They tried to convene the G7. Even OPEC tried to convene the G20 on the oil price and that. But I think the failure of nations to get together is perhaps going to extend maybe the problems that we are facing, facing the globe economically. I think the other thing as well that's been a big disturbance is that over the last decade or so, there's been a kind of movement to move away from, and particularly under Trump, the World Health Organization, all these institutions that America started after the Second World War. There's been a movement even with the World Bank and with the IMF. You can see America's reluctance to get involved or to take the lead in it. So a lot of these institutions that we're relying on at the moment, World Health Organization, even when it comes to climate change, have been underfunded and under-resourced. I know that's history. That's what's going to happen, but I think we're going to get back to that. I think what this lesson is to what this virus has taught us, that we need a coordinated effort to tackle this problem. We can't get on top of it. No nation can do it by themselves. So it's absolutely imperative that when this settles down, that we get back together. And I think one of the things that's worried me as well is just how underprepared nations were, how this caught us by surprise, and we weren't in a position to actually get on top of it from a medical point of view, from a plan B point of view. You know, when it hit us, there was no plan, there was no coordinated plan to actually get on top of it. And this applies to every country. It's really been put together as we've gone along. So I think I think from a global point of view, I think it's going to be very important that you know, that countries actually get back to the basics, get back to those institutions, move away from the kind of politics that have dominated us over the last 5 years, and get back to what businesses are there. And I say no institutions come out. No, America is still fumbling about how to unlock the economy. There's still so many different opinions in the EU. As soon as Italy got into trouble, what happened? Europe locked its borders. No one came to the assistance of Italy. Certainly Germany and the Netherlands wanted to distance themselves from funding issues, etc. It's only the Chinese who came in and provided medical help and masks, etc. And Russia as well, strangely, to Italy. So Italy has said to Europe, you know, thanks for nothing. There's still issues in Britain as well. Huge criticism came, although things seem to be stabilizing there as well. So with China and Russia, we don't know where we are with either of those countries. And maybe it was only the Asian countries of Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore, even though Singapore is having a lot of problems now with migrant workers. I think only those countries seem to come out of it on the right side. So I think there's no nation that has come out okay. South Africa, strange enough, stands out well. And for one reason is that they've listened to medical advice, you know, and despite all our economic problems, I think the way, you know, credit to Cyril Ramaphosa for listening to medical advice and going ahead with the way that they've gone. And we did, you know, the one thing that we forget is that when we tackle this, think of the way in which we have tackled AIDS, education, testing, and so on. And I think from that point of view, I think the world has learned a lot, particularly South Africa. You know, even today, AIDS, we continue to test people for AIDS, and even though we've got still the highest number of cases of AIDS, etc., from a South African point of view, we're on top of it. So we can learn a lot when it comes to health issues. You know, how we've handled the AIDS crisis. Where does this leave us? I think where does all of this leave us? I think the one thing it does is that coming out of this, there's going to be a lot more awareness of public health. There's going to be a lot more awareness of providing proper hospitals, of providing enough beds, of having enough IC units, of having enough equipment. And this is going to be a global issue. We haven't concentrated on this before, but it's going to be a big spend that countries now dedicate a lot more. I've got a flash on my screen, that there's going to be a lot more money spent on public health. I think the other thing is that there's been a lot of pressure on pharmaceutical companies. If you followed pharmaceutical companies the last few years, governments wanted drug prices down. They wanted healthcare down. As a result of that, you weaken these companies by taking away profits. Once you take away profits, there's no money for research and development. Suddenly, we're now realizing that we need those companies. So we don't need them only to focus on popular diseases like lung cancer and heart diseases or prostate cancer, breast cancer, and so on, which are the so-called profitable areas. We have to focus on other areas as well. And I think a lot more companies, going to be pressure taken off pharmaceutical companies so that more money can be spent finding solutions. And of course, science is going to take over from business. I think a lot more money and a lot more respect for scientists and doctors in the years ahead, realizing how we need them, and also, of course, investment in education of scientists and that. So another area is medical equipment. You can't test. I think where we've failed globally is on the testing side. You know, you need a lot more faster testing and a lot faster results. And I think this is one thing, until we get on top of testing, we're not going to get on top of this virus. So I think much more spending on medical devices and quicker testing of, more effective testing of people who may be affected as well. So I think what's going to come out of this is a huge amount of money back into the pharmaceutical area, back into the medical devices area, back into public health. But it's also going to go to companies. You know, the same thing. We're not going to tolerate. We're not going to tolerate dirty toilets. I think when we go to a gathering, when we go to a sport event, when we go to theatre, when we go to airports, when we go to railway stations, I think there's going to be a lot more awareness of health and cleanliness and sanitation. So I think that's another area. I can't find any direct investment into this area, but I think just be aware of this, that this is going to be another area. And this is why we've seen Unilever, Reckitt and Benckiser, and companies of this who make those kind of events, who make those kind of products, doing well. Going to be a big cleanup in companies as well. You know, maintaining toilets and maintaining our offices in the right kind of way. I think the other big shift, as we've mentioned, has been technology. I'm not going to mention this. I think we've discussed this, but I'll quickly go through it. I think, again, these shifts were on their way. You know, the shift to work from home, the shift to work on PCs, e-commerce was already taking over from bricks and mortar stores, etc. All that's going to do now is it's going to grow at a faster pace. Online payment systems, the cloud, more and more storage in the cloud, and of course, products around that, semiconductors, security, all kinds of issues like that, the kind of equipment that goes into cloud, more storage availability. Of course, webcast as well. I think what we've learned now is that we don't have to travel. It's so easy to reach an audience. I can see that we're talking to 100 participants at the moment, which is incredible. You know, if we had it at the shul or something, you might get 30 stragglers or 40 stragglers coming in there. And so, and of course, this is going to have an impact on travel, on business travel. So it's been a huge wake-up call, and also a huge development, the fact that we can reach wider audience and at quick notice. You don't have to book a venue, you don't have to book caterers. We can get the message out pretty well. It's going to do, but don't think it's only going to be commerce that does this. Governments are going to do this as well. When it comes to governments have learned as well, they also don't want an accumulation or gatherings of crowd, etc. So hopefully we're going to get passports and licenses, and even law, even settling law courts or settling claims over distances in using webcasts and that. So I think these are all areas that are going to grow. And of course, we can't ignore entertainment and gaming, which has also been a has hugely benefited from all of this. Gaming, of course, mainly youngsters, after they get tired of watching Netflix, they go straight to their games. So, and we've seen companies like Nintendo, Activision, Blizzard doing very, very well. And of course, we've got to mention schooling as well. Believe me, people are not going to give up their schooling, but what it does show us is that we have got access, we can get access to educators and global specialists using the kind of equipment or technology that we're using at the moment. So I think there's going to be a huge development in education and schooling, as well. So it's an area that we can't ignore. And if you want to position yourself somewhere in the market, I think there's so many businesses that are going to grow as a result of this. I'm going to be coming to the end just pretty soon. But I do want to tell you another area that's going to be developing is that companies are going to move away from staffing. They're going to move, and this is already something that was already in process as well, which is robotics. Not those little people that move around and clean your, clean the floor, etc. But automated factories and that. And I think there are a lot of advantages. You save power, lower output costs, improve quality and so on. And they're a lot healthier and they function even in these kind of areas. So I think you're going to find, if anything pushes companies to do it, I think this is going to be one of the areas as well. This, again, is nothing new. And I think against that as well, we're going to get another area is this de-globalization. Gain that was happening. This is nothing new. You're going to hear about reshoring, cutting the supply chains, not relying on China for everything. Certainly not for equipment like 5G equipment and for essential equipment. It was already happening. It's just going to be sped up. It's only going to speed up a little more. In other words, keeping manufacturing closer, diversifying it, spreading it amongst other nations as well. Of course, this was already happening with 3D printing as well, where you could print in your backyard. So I think companies are going to want their supply chains a lot shorter and not be caught in an issue like this, because the one thing is, as we unlock, we're going to find how difficult it is, because different countries are going to unlock at different times, and therefore building up of inventory and actually manufacturing is going to be very, very difficult depending on your supply chain as well. From a travel and leisure point of view, yes, we're suffering. It's going to take a longer time for that to come on, but I'm not writing it off. I don't believe we're going to stop flying around the world to see people, etc. Maybe business travel takes a bit of a hit there as well, but I think on the other hand, the richer people will be traveling in the private jets and that. I'm going to end off now on the last topic, and it's one that's going to causes a lot of discussion with fuel prices coming down. Do not think this is the end of renewables. I think, despite the fact that oil, you can buy tanker loads for nothing now, I still think that movement is going to continue now. The shift towards renewables, the shift towards cleaner energy, the shift towards better living. I think in all cases, this is going to improve regardless of the price of oil. I think that movement, which was already the ECG movement, environment, governance, and what was the S? I forgot. From that point of view, I don't think this is going to end as well. So I think someone help me on the S. I think we will continue along that movement with renewable energy as well, and just behaving a lot better. So I've tried to rush through this. I know, because I think we've got limited time, and I wanted to leave some kind of opening for questions, etc. I haven't really covered South Africa in great detail. I think South Africa, we find ourselves in a very difficult position because the economy was already under stress before we even went into this. Credit to the government and the Reserve Bank for doing as much as they can to make sure that money is paid and that people are surviving these very difficult times. But I think we're in for very, very tough times in the months ahead as we work our way out of it. But I think there's always good that comes from these, and hopefully we will see a reset of the economy. But Ron, I'm going to leave it there. If you want to, if the topics that are brought up that people want to discuss, or you want to ask me any questions of that in the time that we got available, I'm very happy to try and answer them.
We're going to take two questions. Hands up. The first one I see with hands up, we'll take the question, and afterwards Hilly's going to thank. Anybody for a question? Huh?
I've got a question, Rov.
Okay, who's that? Sean Musica.
Sean Musica, yeah.
Okay, we'd love to hear your
Hi,
question.
David.
Put yourself
Thank you for the insight, and it's a great. Thank you very much for your time. This 500 billion that raised from a variety of banks, the BRICS banks, the IMF, do you have any detail that comprise? And it's fantastic that he's breathing money and new life into the economy, but at some point we're going to have to pay that with an interest bill attached. And can you give a bit more detail around that?
I think that's a problem. No matter how cheap we borrow the money, we're going to have to pay it back, and that's going to cause pain. The only way we can really pay it back is if we grow. But remember, about 130 billion of that was already there. It's just been reallocated spending. I think about 200 million of bank guarantees. In other words, banks to lend it, but the governments will stand behind it. And there, dribs and drabs all over the place. Yes, it's going to make a big difference. But I think, regardless, not only South Africa, but I think the whole world, every businesses that is borrowing money at the moment is going to have to repay it. So I think that's, and we can only repay it with growth. So it's absolutely essential that, that the world gets back to growth and that we get people working again, because without that, I think there's going to be a huge strain that will actually drag us down. And that's why we remain reluctant. Markets are looking 5-6 months ahead, and there is a very, very strong view that we'll get back fast. But I think that's what we're going to monitor to decide. That will be a very important aspect for for stock markets, how fast we get back and how fast people start spending. But Sean, you did right. It is a burden on us, and I think we've gone from 25% of GDP, borrowing from 25% GDP to something like 80%. So our balance sheet, the South African balance sheet, is not looking good.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything?
Hi, David. It's Wayne. How are you?
Oh, Wayne. I didn't realize you were so young.
Thank you. With what's happening in South Africa, I think the gap between the haves and have-nots is even wider and even further than ever was. We're going to be faced with a situation of 50% unemployment, if not more. And we obviously got to stimulate labor and employment, because otherwise things just spiral out of control. What's your thoughts on relaxation of the labor laws to try and get this right? Or do you think government's going to stay fast with their labor laws? Because, as you say, companies are now going to be looking more to IT size and automation, which makes it even more painful to drive employment.
It's a massive issue for South Africa, because we need to get people, obviously get people working. The areas that we can get them working in, of course, tourism, we've got to get them working in factories, we've got to get them working in mines, from the mining side as well. And I've never been a person who's believed in ideology. I've always been a capitalist at heart, even though I married a communist daughter. So I've seen both sides of the equation, but I've always believed in growth. I've always believed in letting people just let the animal spirits out, let capitalistic spirits out, and as people grow businesses, so they start to employ more. I don't think color or anything like that makes a difference. So I'm hoping that there's a reset of the ideas that have driven this economy for the last 15 to 20 years, and we take a different attitude towards that, and we really open up to allowing people to come in here. In other words, putting a red carpet to people instead of putting rules, having a rule-based economy where this is how you're going to do it. You want to come to South Africa, this is how you're going to do it. I'd rather that they said, what can we do for you to be successful? In other words, you want to put money into this economy, what can we do for you to make your business successful. So I'm hoping we get that reset. Maybe I'm a dreamer in that, but I think hopefully globally we're going to get a reset of a lot of things that have got us into difficult positions. So Wayne, I wish I had anything. I wish I had a better solution to it, but that's my hope, is that we just wake up and realize that we need growth. I think Tito knows. And I think Tito is one person that, hopefully will start to drive something like that, where we actually open up our economy for business without rules.
Robert, you're on.
Hi, David. David, hi. Thank you very much for your informative discussion. You don't call yourself a professional, but I definitely do consider you a professional, hearing you most days on the talk shows that go live. My question is regarding the Rand-dollar exchange. Where do you see it going? Obviously, importers are under huge strain right now, and this is obviously going to impact the economy quite substantially. So where do you see the Rand-dollar in a correction perspective, and how long do you see it correcting, or will it correct?
Of course it will correct. It'll correct when the global economy picks up. And that's why it's when we start to see growth picking up again and people getting back to work and stock markets picking up, the Rand will improve, and it will improve substantially. It'll find a level, maybe at the 15.50, 14. And from then on, it will probably start to weaken again, because that's the natural, that's a natural trajectory. But I think in the short term, my own gut feel is this is where we are. Short of things getting worse, and I'm watching stock markets now, watch them carefully, but I think that's going to be your guideline, and watch the markets very carefully. If we keep seeing the S&P pick up, if we keep seeing animal spirits come and people wanting to buy equities and that, then you're going to see a very sharp correction, and correction meaning improvement in the Rand. And, from my point of view, I don't see, that's why I'm saying 15. Where were we in January? 14, 15? So it's very possible to make up all that lost ground. But a lot depends on how fast we get out of this. I can live with a U-shaped recovery. I don't need a V-shaped recovery. In other words, I don't need it to bounce back, but I want it to bounce back. When will this happen? Probably the second half of the year. So for the meantime, just hang in there.
I'm assuming guys in the luxury import goods sector, those guys are going to obviously have to strap in very tight, and let's see how those guys hold on.
For importers, it's going to be hell. For oil, it's great. For the oil prices down, and that for anybody importing, for the meantime, it's a rough time. We've been through it before, but I think
especially luxury goods. Yeah,
luxury goods, sure. I know you don't need luxury. Just buy a polo bag, or buy, I don't know what other thing. Go to Woolworths, just
Start train.
Buy Country Road, you don't have to buy the big brands.
Right, thanks, Dave.
Billy.
Great. Thanks. Well, Dave, I just wanted to thank you for your time. You really have shared some valuable insights during this COVID-19 pandemic, and I know many of us have learned something extremely valuable out of your talk this evening. So thank you for that, and thank you for giving of your time. I hope you all enjoyed tonight's talk as much as I did. Also, please note there is more to come, so please join us next week, where we'll be hosting Herman Mashaba, who will speak on the current political and economic affairs in South Africa and globally. And thank you all for joining in. I hope you have a great evening and keep safe. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Really, really good.